All right, so in this video, I'm going to show you how I do a value sketch before I do a painting using pencil and a couple of gray markers. All right, welcome to Paint Coach. If you're new to the channel, my name is Chris Fornatero, and I help thousands of students every single month get better at oil painting, whether it's through my online courses on Teachable or my weekly tutorials I put out on Patreon. Now, this video is actually the second video in a 3-part series. I put out the first video last week. If you haven't watched that, I highly recommend checking that one out first. In that, I show how I chose this photo in particular. So if you struggle with finding good scenes to paint, or you go out there and you take your own photos and nothing's inspiring you, or you take it home, you paint, doesn't work, that last video is going to help you a lot. But in this one, I'm going to focus on how I do a compositional value sketch before a painting. In the next week's video, I'll show you how I do the painting. All right, so I just have some paper and my photo printed out here. You don't have to print it out. I'm just doing it for the whole camera filming setup. And what I like to do, or what I always recommend people do, start with pencil. I'm just going to draw out just a little box that's, roughly the dimensions that I have right there. So in this first steps, I'm just going to draw out the major shapes that I see. I'm not going to be worried about changing anything just yet. So I look at this, I'm just going to try and copy the photo exactly the way I see it. So I'm saying, okay, kind of helps me sometimes. I just put little tick marks that are halfway. So I can say okay, I got these trees. I'm just kind of massing in these trees. They're kind of right there. And then there's this, that's the grass. Then there's this path that goes right here. There's this big rock that I like. Probably use that at some point. Up here, and there's part of a tree coming in there. And then it's like the grass that's in light. And then there's some trees right there. And just putting the line, this part of the path is in shadow, that's in light. Gonna ignore all of the dappled light for right now. Then maybe got some little holes within there in the trees. All right, so this is what I have, just copying the photo pretty much exactly what I see or close to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at it and say to myself, or ask myself, what are things that I don't like? What are things about the composition that are sticking out to me as not good? I always say that a lot of composition is just getting rid of bad compositional elements, and then you'll kind of find yourself into a good composition. And one of the major ideas or concepts to understand with composition is dynamic shapes, meaning when you break down your scene into shapes like this, you want them to try and be as different size as possible. And most importantly, I feel that you should have one big dominant shape or one element of the scene. I always call it the star of the scene, that is the biggest, that's taking up the most space. And most of the time it's the part that you want to emphasize or highlight or showcase the most in the scene, the part of the scene that you want to paint the most a lot of the time. And so I'm looking at this, I'm this shape here, it's similar size to this shape, similar size to the trees here. If I look at this, I can't tell what is being emphasized. If this was a painting, someone's painting, and I was looking at it, I'd be I don't know exactly what is being showcased here, or what the scene is about. Is it about these trees? Is it about the path? What is it about? So I'm okay, let me try this again. Just gonna scoot that over there. Just gonna try another one. Just gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna say, okay, I really like this path. That's kind of the thing I'm most excited about painting. It's gonna be fun putting that dappled light, not how it is there, but I don't know. I like the color, I like the purple and the yellow, like the complement colors there. I also just like having a lot of shadow and then a little bit of light in the back there. So let's say these are halfway points. And also, in the last video, I talked a little bit about your focal point a lot of time is going to be the area of highest contrast, where your darkest dark meets your lightest light. And I'm feeling like this is going to be a good focal point area where this shadow, like this path and the shadow meets the light. More specifically, the path and light, because the path and light is lighter than the grass and light. So where this bright light path touches the dark shadow of the grass, that's going to be a focal point. Right now, it's almost dead center. I don't want that, so I want to move it over and I want to make this bigger. Two things I want to try and do in this one. And so I'm just going to put some light lines right there just to kind of help me know where to place things so I don't place it in the center. And so I'm going to say, okay, I want it to be here. And so maybe the path no, maybe the path comes there. Something like that. It's my little eraser. But you see, a helpful thing of breaking it down to simple shapes like this, it's a lot easier to change them when they're simple. If you're thinking of this like trees and a path and it's just harder for you to mentally think, okay, I got to change that. But so that there, this is going to come here. Maybe a little bit of the dirt going up the hill there. Still gonna have that rock there. So that's the path. And see, since I've had the path take up all that space, it's gonna be emphasized more. Before it was down here, it was below the halfway line and didn't like cross over this midpoint line really. So now it's a bigger dominant part of the scene. So this is going to be up there. Got that tree there. There. And now because of this placement, these trees on the left are taking up less space, which is good. Kind of down here. Right there's the light part of the path. And then there. And then I'm going to make these trees back here. I'm going to shorten them up. My little lines here probably getting in your way of seeing what I'm trying to do. All right, so there you go. I'm liking this, and I'm just going to go through and kind of check things and be like, okay, you know, all my major lines of the scene are all converging here, which is nice. And I feel like I'm even going to put a little person in like right there just to, you know, emphasize that focal point a little bit. You know, everything looks proportional and everything. You know, I like how these trees aren't taking up much space anymore, because this, I was just like these trees, like, I don't know, they're not going to be, you know, this isn't that interesting to paint. Like, I would have to probably put in a lot more of the pine needles, which I'm still going to do here. You'll probably see that in the final painting. But I'm liking the shapes here. I like the dynamic, like this is really big. These are now smaller than this. You know, the shapes are different sizes, which is what I was looking for. Now, the next thing I'm gonna have to do, which is very important, is to assign a value to these shapes. So that's where these markers come into play. These are just touch new. You can use Prismacolor or whatever. I just went on Amazon and found these. I'll put a link in the description of this video to where I got these. They have a whole bunch. I'm just gonna be using the number 2 and the number 8 here. So I always like to figure out my sketches in 3 values: dark, a midtone, and a light. So for reference, this is gonna be my dark. Keep that undone. This is gonna be my midtone, and then my light is just gonna be the white of the paper. So I like to start with the darks. And the main thing I want to do with this is the same idea that I was talking about with the shapes, is that I want you to be able to look at this when it's done and say immediately, oh, like the dark value's taking up the most space, or the light's taking up the most space, or the midtone. Like I want it to be very obvious which is taking up the most and which is taking up the least amount of space. And you'll hear a lot of times painters talk about the idea of a scene. And for this one, longest time, like I didn't really know exactly what that meant. And it's okay if like it doesn't click with you right away, but for this one, I feel like the idea that I like about it, and like part of the reason why I chose it, is I liked this idea of you're standing in shadow and there's all this shadow, and this like in the distance, there's a little bit of light, like you're looking out to the light part that's outside the woods. And the way that idea is going to happen is by having a lot of shadow and a little bit of light. All right, I'm just going to stop here just for a second, just to let you know, if you want more practice and lessons on composition, I've made my composition coaching guide. It's completely free. It's a series of videos where I break down composition in a way that you can understand and show you examples of composition and how I go about finding them. If you want to check that out, there's a link to it in the description of this video. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, obvious that these trees are going to be a shadow. It's the darkest thing in the scene. You don't ever want to try and push things too much. Like there is some wiggle room with these values. Like the path and shadow could be a midtone, it could be a dark. The trees in the background could be a midtone, or they could be a light. Like there's always some wiggle room, but you don't want to try and push things too far. And a lot of times what the shape kind of naturally is, a lot of times I feel like is where it should be. It's, probably the reason why you chose it. This is interesting to you for a reason. So you don't want to change too much, but I'm just looking at this. I'm like, okay, that's a dark shape. I got another tree over here. That's another dark shape. And then I'm looking at this path and I'm like, okay, like what's this path going to be? It's either going to be a shadow or a midtone. If it's a midtone, I'm going to have to make the grass darker. Like when you squint your eyes, it definitely looks darker. And in order to kind of keep this line that I like, I most likely will need it to be different values just to kind of keep those lines there. I mean, those lines still, I guess, would be there with like a color shift, but I am liking this. So I'm going to make the decision to make the grass also a dark. And I'm thinking, okay, this is actually good too, because my focal point, I know for a fact that I'm going to keep the dirt here at the end of the path a lightest light. And so it's actually really good that I have that go up right next to it. But you can see, like, I'm not worried about defining the tree and the grass. This is like another good thing that doing this helps you with, is not to think about objects, think about shapes, and think about the overall value composition. And so I'm like, okay, even though like things are going to be different colors, actually these trees will actually probably come down further. I'll show them coming down further. And then this is all dark there. And the same thing with this grass. I'm going to keep it relatively dark. And then there's like a shadow underneath this rock here. Now, just a little fun. Oh, I forgot my little person to put that in. If you're asking me, like, Chris, like, why you keep it in that rock and like, how do you know right from the start? It's because this line, I wanted to break this line up. I didn't want to have this just shooting off, like off the side of the page. And that's just like a good like barrier, kind of keeps your eye in. I'm probably going to do something in the painting around here, maybe put in some dappled light just to kind of break this line up. But I just wanted you know, that rock was there. I'm like, all right, I should use that to break that up. Okay, so I have my darks in, and it's actually pretty good balance. I always talk about balance, and I just particularly like to think about my composition in 4 boxes. And I want, again, dynamic balance, this idea of dynamic balance in each of them. So like this bottom left one, a lot of dark. Over here, good amount of dark, but definitely less dark. Here, really little dark, more dark. So they're different. I wouldn't want all of these to be even. And chances are I'm probably going to put some dappled light kind of coming up here, so it's going to be even less less light. And I actually realized that I kind of did forget to like I was going to have some of the dirt kind of coming up the path there, but oh well. I'll take a mental note of it. So okay, now I got my number 2, and I'm like, okay, I want this to be my path. I'm not worried about the dappled light right now. I just want to kind of see if this works, and then I can strategically put in the dappled light when I go to paint it. So I got that. I'm like, okay, I like that. Now I have this area here, and I could keep the trees and all this light maybe, but I know that trees are upright objects, and in landscapes, there's different value planes. Most of the time, the sky is going to be your lightest value, and then any flat ground is going to be second light. It's going to be a little bit darker, but since it's flat, it's catching the most light. And then slanted plains like mountains or hills are going to be a little darker because they're not catching the same light as like a flat plane. And then a lot of times the darkest are going to be upright objects, things like trees, people, houses. So I probably do want to make these a little darker. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, I'm really liking this. I feel like it's very clear that, you know, you look at this, okay, the dark is definitely taking up the most space. The light is taking up the least space. I feel like that's very clear. It's communicating the idea that I like. You know, I feel this shadow area is very dominant, which is making the light part at the end, which is the focal point, which is great, a lot more interesting. Again, like if I would have like made this half shadow, half light, it's not as interesting as like a lot of shadow and a little light, or you can do the opposite from a different position where it's a little bit of shadow and a lot of light. You just kind of want to keep it dynamic. So I have this, I've made it interesting, and I know a lot of you might be saying like, Chris, you keep saying like, oh, make it interesting. What if I don't know what makes it interesting? A lot of that is just understanding composition. It's going to take practice. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. The more good paintings you look at, like whenever I'm on Instagram looking at paintings, I'm constantly being like, okay, why do I like this? Like, what's the composition? What are the value patterns? You can do master copies, like look at painters like Edgar Payne. You know, he was great with composition. Highly recommend his book, Edgar Payne's Composition of Outdoor Painting. He actually has like a lot of pages in there of little thumbnails like this of compositions that he's kind of like labeled like an S composition or a steel yard, a circle, and you know, things like that, which can kind of help shift your brain and to know what to look for. But I hope just like seeing this example helps. For me, I've always liked watching examples. I feel like the more examples and the more times I saw painters do these sketches, I picked up on a little more and a little more. I wish it could just all click for you right now. That's probably not going to happen, but at least you're like one step closer, and it's just going to take a lot of practice. You know, I have my sketchbook and it's filled with these. Like I'm constantly doing these and figuring it out and getting better. So that's it for this video of the series. Again, next week, I'll be doing the painting of this and showing you how I transfer this into a painting. All right, hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.